Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Jasper Snyder with the ARF. Thanks so much for being here this afternoon. Do tell me if this is too loud, by the way, and David Parker over there will make sure the volume is not too painful for you all. So thanks for being here this afternoon. We've got a really, really cool agenda, some great pieces of content. And tell me if you can't see me, by the way. Marilyn, looks like you might have trouble with the visuals over there, but there you go. All right. So let me grab the clicker. So I'm going to set the scene today. We're going to talk about cross-platform media investment, measurement, and targeting. And I want to set the scene by showcasing some research that we unveiled earlier on this year. This is perhaps the first time any of you will have seen a speaker refer to a backwards presentation in the glass over there, by the way. So if I get some of the data wrong, it's because I'm looking at it backwards. Anyway, to set the scene, we know advertising works. How do we know that? We know it from decades of scientific and academic research. Most notably, in terms of proving that advertising works, is the 1995 publication, which was the behavior scan work that was actually done in 1989. And what that did was to prove definitively that advertising worked and quantify that for new brands and established brands, and also to quantify the long-term impact of advertising 2 times. So what's the question today? The question is, how does advertising work in a cross-platform world? Very different world from that which we lived in 26, 27 years ago when that first research was produced. Specifically, in terms of consumer behavior, and I'm not blowing the lid off this, but if you think about this, there are basically 2 kind of changes in the type of behavior here. One is the geographical aspect, so where consumers access media. And secondly is the temporal piece, so when consumers access media. So if you think about looking at media on your way to work, on the commute, in the bathroom, in the bedroom, it's all very different to that which it was 25, 26 years ago. So to answer the questions around cross-platform, we looked at ad spend here. If you look at ad spend, it's relatively steady. It's not spectacular, and it certainly doesn't reflect or mirror the paradigm shift in terms of consumer media consumption, which is that massive, massive change. Granted, if you look at digital, there are double-digit increase in digital, predominantly driven by mobile, in fact, which is around about 38, 39% year-on-year growth. But generally speaking, you can see when you look at the overall ad spend thing, that the advertisers are likely moving money from one channel to another. So the central question that we asked ourselves about a year ago, does that actually make sense? Should you move money from one channel to another, or should you invest in platforms incrementally? And to answer that question, I won't go into the whole detail on the background here, but we basically set out with a whole bunch of industry leaders to define how we were going to go about answering this question. We invested a ton of time and money into the research, and came out with 3 ground truth experiments. My co-conspirator Manuel Garcia is at the back here. He produced one of those experiments. Chris Bacon also, I know many of you know Chris, produced one on research quality. And then we also produced one on cross-platform ROI. And what that did was to provide us with 5 ground truths. The first of which answered that question: should I invest in platforms incrementally, or should I rob Peter to pay Paul? Take money out of one platform to serve another one. So the answer is this: more platforms is better, or more platforms are better. It's the grammatically appropriate version, right? So if you look at the average 2-platform campaign, it's 19% more effective than the average single platform campaign. The average 5-platform campaign is 35% more effective than the average single platform campaign. And yet, when you look at how advertisers are actually spending their money, you can see, if you look at the yellow numbers here, 29% plus 31%, so 60% of campaigns are on 2 platforms or less. So that was the first big learning for us. The second big learning was around the different combinations of media, and we'll be talking about this in our panel in a little while, the different combinations of media that drive ROI. So what we found was, compared to a TV-only campaign, if you look at a TV and print campaign, it's 19% more effective on average. TV and radio, 20% more effective on average. And then when you look at TV plus digital, you can see that it creates what we call a kicker effect, 60% more effective than a TV-only campaign. That's the second ground truth, the kicker effect. The third ground truth goes to demographic differences. So as we were putting this together, one of the hypotheses that we were kicking around was, okay, we see that, we all see the headlines around millennials not watching TV, etc., only cord cutting, cord nevers, etc., only using mobile. Does the optimal mix between traditional and digital look different for millennials than it does for adults in general? And the answer, is kind of surprising, was not as much as you might think. So you look at the optimal mix for all adults, for persons 18 plus, for traditional digital, it's traditional 78% and 22% digital. And yet when you look at the millennials, you might have expected that to be drastically different, but it's actually not so different. Granted, there's a whole different bunch of types of millennial, right? There's a lot of difference between an 18-year-old unmarried person and a 34-year-old with 3 kids, but nevertheless, as a broad bucket finding, we thought that was interesting. So the fourth ground truth is around about digital. We see the massive amounts of money that are pouring into digital, just picking out 4 tactics here, not a comprehensive list. 6 billion in desktop banner and video respectively, 4 billion in mobile video, and a staggering $17 billion in mobile banners. And one of the questions we asked ourselves as we looked at those figures is, okay, there's been a whole ton of research around frequency in television. There's a guy who used to work at GE called Herbert Krugman who came up with the 3-hit theory, I think in the 60s or 70s. Fair amount of work around TV frequency, but not so much around digital. So what we did here was to establish the effective frequency for digital, or establish whether it was asymptotic rather. And what we found was that once you get past 35 impressions in a month for digital, and this is granted, this is a very, very broad brushstroke, because all categories are going to be slightly different. But once you go past 35 impressions in a month, typically 1 per day, then you can actually harm your brand. Sales may actually go down. So the learning here that we wanted to share with the industry, or the opportunity, was that advertisers should really maintain a close focus on frequency. We think it's a very low-hanging fruit for the industry. The fifth ground truth, and the fifth and final ground truth, is around creative. We know creative is super important. This is Erwin Efron making the point that I just forgot to add on. We've known that frequency is an issue for years, but we don't know how much of it is in digital. So going back to creative, we know it's super important. This is a figure from Ipsos. I think if you look at Nielsen, I think also there's some stuff that came out from MSW. It's all in the same range, right? Somewhere between 60 and 80% of the impact of any given campaign is down to the creative. So we know that's important. We also know now that we've quantified the impact of cross-platform advertising. The question is, what's my creative strategy? Should I use exactly the same creative from platform to platform? Should I use completely different or something else? And the answer is this, and I'll unpack the jargon in a second. A unified campaign can be 57% more effective than a non-unified campaign. And by non-unified, what I mean is a campaign that's typically produced by different agencies. So whilst ostensibly or nominally in the service of the same product advertising, it doesn't share the same messaging, the same characters, the same music, the same color, etc., etc. Whereas a unified campaign is much more impactful. Just to give one example, actually wasn't part of this study, but the Toyota Swagger Wagon campaign is one that readily comes to mind for many people when they think about a campaign. So there you had a great 30-second TV spot, but you had a 2-minute version on YouTube and so on to take advantage of the different nature of that particular platform. So those are the 5 ground truths at the heart of our Advertising Works project. If you'd like more details on either this part of it or the neuro and creative part that Manuel produced, or indeed the mobile research part that Chris produced, just let me know. Catch me after the event, and I'll sort you out. To summarize, 5 pieces there. We asked ourselves, is it better to move money from one platform to the other? The answer is definitively no. More platforms are better. Second, add traditional or combine traditional and digital media. That applies for millennials also. Fourth, watch out for frequency in digital. And then fifth, use a unified creative strategy. And we think the opportunity is pretty large for the industry. So looking at ad spending in the US this year is predicted to be close to 200 billion, 196 billion. We think that by maxing out that cross-platform investment, we can create another $31 billion in the industry. So nothing at all. However, to do that, we have to get some help. Right? This is not for the faint of heart. We need the fearless leaders. We've got some great presenters today. And they're all going to be talking about the reinvention of TV and cross-screen measurement and targeting. And this is just kind of a fun little chart here. If you think about, any given, hit TV show, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you're talking about one way to watch that thing. You're watching it live, right? Whereas I think one of the estimates that came out recently was that, there are 23 legal ways to watch, or often 23 legal ways to watch a given program, and a couple of illegal ones too. So the world has hugely changed. We'll wait for our panel to go into a little bit more detail on what that change has looked like over the last little while. So our speakers today, we have Kelly Abcarian from Nielsen. Hey, Kelly. We have Adam Gerber from ABC, Nick Johnson from Turner, Brandon Levine from our host Digitas LBI, John Sollecito from SymphonyAM, Charlene Weisler will be here in a little while, and to kick us off, we've got Richard Zackon from the Council of Research Excellence. So Richard has a fascinating background, started off in agency world, went into media, went into comedy. He's an esteemed professor, and he's the facilitator of the CRE. Now, for those of you who don't know the CRE, I kind of view the CRE as just an absolute machine at producing really, really high quality research. So it's really an honor to have Richard here today to talk to us about the latest project they've got. Thank you, Richard. Let's have a round of applause, please.
The honor is actually to be here today. So thank you, Jasper. And thank you for all the people who stayed till the end of my presentation. Okay, I'm going to stand here because I can't read backwards and I can barely see that screen. I can read here. So the title is What Drives Engagement and Recall in Ad Delivery. This is the second of two series. I want to make a couple points, and there's a theme to what I'm going to speak to today. We tend to think of research as a particular moment. We ask a question, we find the answer, and somebody does something with the answer. And we forget the degree to which research is a process. It's not a destination. It's not something one time. It's ongoing. This is the second of two parts. The first part we did last year. There were some issues and controversies around it. We had always planned a second wave. This is the second wave. Let me look a little bit ahead here. By the way, here are the companies that make up the CRE, and you may not all be familiar with the CRE. I spared you a slide about the CRE, but these are the member companies of the CRE. We are funded by Nielsen. We act independently of Nielsen, and we do primary research. I'm looking around here and see at least three faces of people we've worked with who work at companies who've done research for CRE. Hi, Laura. Hi, Howard. Hi, Peter. In fact, each of those three companies had some impact on today's presentation. And these are the people who are on the committee of the CRE which produce it, which includes Jasper. It has been chaired by Tom Ziangas. It used to be chaired by Laura when she was on the agency side or media side or whatever, one of those sides. Some of these names may be familiar. I want to start with a little context too. Anyone know the name Harold Laswell? Okay. Harold Laswell was one of the leading social scientists of the 20th century. He was a political scientist. He was at the Yale Law School. He formulated very early in communication research a classic statement, which was, who says what in which channel to whom with what effect? Up until then, people hadn't thought of it like a coherent, holistic whole, and that's the way he put it. And I say with most of our work on cross-platform, and a lot of Nielsen's work, hi Kelly, nice to see him, the focus is on who says what in which channel to whom. It's accounting. Glenn Enoch of Nielsen is fond of saying how many, how often, how long. All of which has to do with the numbers of counting the people in front of the screen. About 3 years ago, the CRE looked at the question more seriously with what effect. We did a survey of Nielsen clients, and 88% of them felt the big concern was aligning these metrics across platform. We enlisted Howard's company as well as Betsy Frank to talk to people in the industry to see what were the issues that mattered, and that was the key issue that mattered: is how do you line up the various screens? Another way to say it is, what's the equivalence of an impression on a TV screen versus one on a mobile phone or a tablet? So the research we did in 2015, and there was some controversy around the research, was we looked at 4 different screens. We went to the networks to get content to put on there, ads to put in there. And there was concern that the way the ads are actually delivered on those screens aren't the same. A TV screen is not the same as a mobile phone, and the ads are not the same. But research is a process, and we had to start somewhere. So we did a main effect study last year of screens. We looked at TV, we looked at laptops, we looked at smartphones, and we looked at tablets. And we held the advertising constant across the screens, because you got to start somewhere, and that's what we did. There was concerns whether that was flawed research, good research. Our sense was it was incomplete research, but you got to start somewhere, which is what we did. This year, we went ahead and began looking at different ways that ads get delivered. The biggest question being the ad load, which is not the same across all media. So the company that we worked with last year, which is Hub Research, Peter's here. If you're going to present, it's good to have your research provider right by your side. So Peter, you got my back, I hope. And they did the research last year, and then they did the research again this year, where we looked at the different ad delivery mechanisms. The research was conducted in 3 phases. First, we needed to recruit. We recruited 16 to 54-year-olds. I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly. The slides will be on our website. ARF is welcome to put it on its website after we correct a couple of them. But the key variables there, we wanted to test ad load, a full ad load, a moderate ad load, and a light ad load. Ad placement, whether it's a pre-roll or no pre-roll. Ad repetition, some ads were not repeated at all. Some ads were repeated once. Some ads were repeated more than once. In some cases, we disabled fast forwarding. In some cases, we allowed for fast forwarding. And something that I'm just barely familiar with, but learned something about, is about a countdown clock. What's a countdown clock do in the midst of an ad pod? And then we got back to people the next day and asked them questions online. So that was the basic setup. There were 2,500 people who participated across 4 different platforms. We had both live TV and VOD. In this, we didn't have a lot of variation in programming. We were somewhat limited into what was available. We're not going to report out individual results, but those were the topics. We also had short-form advertising. So we had a mix of variables, the idea, the findings. I think I passed over something I should not have. Excuse me. Whoa, 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 whoa. Mr. Mann, could you help me? Very good, thank you. I'm going to go back to what was done. Or did that? There we go. In 2015, we learned that the larger TV screen has a more powerful experience. No question about it. They're more likely to pay attention to the ads on the large screen, and people were more successful at recalling brands on the large screen. So then we replicated that effect, and here's what we found this year, basically with the same results as follows. And there on the left was viewing experience. How do people like the viewing experience? And clearly the TV, or in this case, often the VOD, was the most favorable. Have I gotten this stuff right, Peter? Was the most favorable experience. Pardon? Thank you, I appreciate that. So the TV screen was the most favorable viewing experience. That's different from attention to the ads or recall of the ads. In terms of the attention to the ads, actually the smartphone did pretty well. In this case, did better than the TV screen in terms of attention to the ads. And then ability to identify a brand, again, roughly equal. One would have thought that the larger screen would do more, but it didn't appear to be that way. The ad load, and this was the critical question, and this was a stumbling block in the first bit of research because people felt it wasn't comparable, and we knew we had to do the ad load, but we had, again, got to start somewhere. So here's the effect of ad load. Not surprisingly, light ad loads, more attention to the ads. Less is more when it comes to ad load. Right? In terms of attention to the show, actually it has an effect on attention to the show. If you have a lot of ads in the ad pod, little less attention to the show. By the way, if you have questions, we're an intimate crowd here, so I prefer not to wait. And again, all the data will be there, so you don't have to capture or do anything. But that was the main effect of ad load. Fewer brands, more recall. Again, not a surprise. Right? More ads you put in there, the more difficult it is for people to recall. By the way, Peter and I had a question about, do you talk about the drop of 12 points from light to full, or you talk about a drop of 25% of recall? My experience in ad sales says you talk about a drop of 25% in recall, not 12 points. But they're both true. So lighter ad load, better communication to the audience. In the case of a full ad load, TV is marginally better, but better. By the way, those little asterisks are marks of significance. Oh, there's my timer. I'm good. So the full ad load, if you're going to show a full ad load, you're better off on the big screen. For a lighter ad load, not true. If you're selling on smaller screens, lighter ad load, better off. You're better off overall with a lighter ad load, but suddenly the smaller screen shows superiority over the big screen when there is a lighter ad load. And we looked at a number of other measures as well. We had pre-rolls versus no pre-rolls. Pre-rolls don't get viewed as much, and they're not as effective. So one thing we learned from this, if you're buying advertising, pre-rolls would look like half the value of the regular ad. And this should hardly be surprising. Anyone know the name Ebbinghaus? You should see some hands on Ebbinghaus. I see a smile, but no hands. Hermann Ebbinghaus, German, 1880s. Repetition. If you want people to learn something, repeat it. If you want people to learn something, repeat it. If you want people, you get my point. Okay, so repetition helps communication. No repetition, people saw the ad once, they recalled 54% of the ads were recalled. One repetition, 63%, multiple repetitions, 69%. Now, it is more expensive for repetition. This was a big surprise to me. Is everyone familiar with the countdown clock on TV? Evidently, it's a big deal. What we found, I'll show you, people like it, but more importantly, it's effective. So this is ad attention when there's a countdown clock. It goes up, one might say, I would say, 20%, from 20 to 24%, which is a 20% increase. And in terms of recall of brands, countdown clock improves the recall of brands, which is a critical measure for advertisers. Having the ability, and this is a little intricate, there's one thing to have the ability to fast forward, and then there's actual fast forwarding. Right? The ability to fast forward didn't make much of a difference. And ours was a little bit artificial, as Peter made sure to remind me before I went up here, in that we asked people not to fast forward. Am I wrong?
We didn't specify.
Okay. Oh, we did not ask them not to do it.
Correct, but it turns out most people did not use it because of the nature of they were going to hesitate that on. But the people who did do that on the right-hand side, if they did do it, they were much less likely.
Right. And we know the rate of fast forwarding in a natural setting because Nielsen measures that. Correct, Kelly? I got it. It takes a village here to get these things right. So fast forwarding, if people do fast forward, it's going to lower recall, not a surprise. Okay, so here is kind of main effects here, not the main effects for the size of the screen we looked at, but ad load, light ad load helps. Ad frequency, multiple frequency helps. Countdown clock helps. Things which hurt, placing ad in a pre-roll and fast forward. Any questions so far? Are we on time? We're good. We'll have a little discussion. This was interesting. I thought this was interesting, something I didn't think about. People actually like the countdown clock. Maybe it permits them to time something. It's not that distracting, right? So you know how long you have to fix your drink before you come back to TV. So the countdown clock both helps to recall, and people like it. That's a win-win for the audience and for the advertiser. Repeating ads, people don't like so much. Helps a little, but people don't like so much. Pre-roll, people don't like so much. And not being able to, not having the capacity to fast forward, people don't like so much. So there's a trade-off between what people like and what's effective. Okay, driving experience and recall. We did a multivariate design, and I'm putting this slide up here because I like to say fractional factorial design. We did a fractional factorial design. It'll be on the final. You don't know what it is. A fractional factorial design means we don't do every possible combination of variables. If you notice, we had a lot of variables. I'll show you in a second how many we had. But we did enough that we could predict what an interaction would be. I get that right, Peter? I did it well. You can pronounce it right. So the objective is to measure the impact of lots of combinations. And we have a lot of data that we really haven't fully analyzed for those combinations, but we now have the capacity with a database. By the way, these data are available to Nielsen clients. If they want to see the data, Nielsen will house it. We can help direct and help facilitate that. So the results of the fractional factorial design is can be used to predict the results of any possible combination, even if we didn't directly. It gives us a roadmap by platform. You won't see the roadmap because there was an error on the side. Research is a process. Sometimes in the midst of the process, you stumble. The process is messy, but you learn from the process. Anyone ever done, pardon? Iteration. Anyone done research which wasn't messy at some point? Probably pretty cut and dried research, probably not a lot of learning. And it allows what-if combinations. We won't show the what-ifs here, but there are. Okay, now this is an interesting finding, and this is the percent of total variance explained by the ad delivery, by the show, and by the platform. Those are three different variables here. The ad delivery were all those things about what the ad load was, pre-roll, countdown clock, etc. In terms of the viewing experience, the platform makes the difference. 43% of the variation, which we could explain, which was 40% of the overall variation, is explained by the platform. That's not the case in brand recall. We also use Nielsen's brand effects as another dependent measure of advertising recall. Now, it is the case that for brand recall, whether measured by Nielsen or our own brand recall measurement, that the ad delivery does explain most of that variation. Those are the number of iterations, the ad load, et cetera, et cetera. Or some other factors. These were all the measures that we looked at. So this was, the CRE is a bunch of working research professionals who come up with all these possibilities. Hub brought us some. Laura has worked with the CRE. She knows what it is. That they come in with something and then the members have their own pieces of it. So we looked at platform variables, ad delivery variables, video setting, with whom they watched, tech comfort, how tech savvy they were, role of the TV in terms of how much they watch, how important, features, state of mind, sort of moods and emotions, which we're looking more and more at generally these days. Multitasking, and I'll have some multitasking to show. Frequency of ad frequency, whether people are users of the brand or not, and then various demos. So let's look to see the things we learned. This was pretty interesting. We did a factor analysis, or Hub did a factor analysis, and 4 factors were pretty clearly identified. These were the 9 underlying elements were what defined the factors. And this is all multitasking. There was digital multitasking, which is use of social media, browse websites, text or IM. We didn't invent these factors. The data told us what the factors were. So the fact that those 3 went together makes intuitive sense. We were pretty pleased with that. There's work-related multitasking, read or wrote emails, job-related work. That's work-related. Whether Anthony Weiner's computer was included in this, we don't know. This was before the controversy. Nonverbal multitasking. Nonverbal multitasking is eating, doing household-related tasks, going into another room. All these things go on. And then conversation, face-to-face conversation. So there are 4 different types of multitasking. I'm going to skip over this slide. I may come back to it if there's time. But here was the overall input in terms of brand recall. When there's no multitasking, people remembered 40% of the brands. We all know that multitasking diverts attention. There's no such thing as the brain doing 2 things at once. I say that to the people who are on their phones right now. Didn't respond. Conversation doesn't have that big of an impact on recall. Anyone have a hunch why? I have a hunch why. Well, they could be talking about the brand, although we found they usually don't, if I'm not mistaken. You don't have to take your eyes off the screen when you're talking. You can continue a conversation and still be aware of what's happening on the screen. So if someone's going to multitask during your ad, you would probably prefer they were talking. You would prefer they weren't multitasking as well. Then there's nonverbal multitasking. They could be eating, they could be going into another room, etc. And actually, these 2 elements are reversed. It's a mistake that we will correct. But working in digital, basically cognitive thought is going to negatively impact recall. That's what we thought. That's our explanation. Here's the good news. There's something that older people do well. Put myself in that class. We recall ads better than younger people. I was delighted that I still had a relevant social skill. So the 35 to 54s were better at brand recall than the 16 to 34s. That may be that they're more familiar with the brand. We've been around longer. But whatever, what that might suggest is you don't need as much frequency with an older audience, although the truth is you're probably going to get it anyway because they're the ones currently with TV using it. Key takeaways from this research is bigger screens still lead to better viewing experience. We did 2 separate studies with Hub, and that's what we found. The bigger screens, a better experience. The ad load and the platform combined strongly to influence ad attention and engagement. So you can't separate, and that was one of the concerns in the networks we spoke to, that the ad load is different on a large screen than a small screen. And again, research is a process. You've got to start somewhere, and that's what we did. So TV screens can support full ad loads with reasonable recall. Been doing it for 60 years or more, seems to work. Tablets and phones have a recall advantage when the load is moderate or light. And for the most part, the load is more moderate and lighter. So it would seem like the media companies are gearing their offerings consistent with what works for the audience. And then computer recall is lowest across the board. Not exactly sure why that is, but that is. It's not handheld, maybe the difference. The attention isn't there. More key takeaways. The ad countdown clocks lead to greater brand recall overall. Good thing to consider if it works for your medium. Pre-rolls are more likely to be tuned out than ads running during a show. Ad repetition helps with recall, but leads to a more negative viewing experience. Ad repetition helps with recall, but leads to a more negative. You probably didn't like that I just said that, but you'll remember it. Fast forwarding is detrimental to brand recall, but in our case was used infrequently. In the non-research situation, it's probably used more frequently, but we can account for it, again, because Nielsen measures it. And one of the main factors in ad disengagement is multitasking. There's a lot of looking now about distraction. Where's Manuel? There's Manuel. Manuel's on a CRE committee that's looking at consumer neuro, actually biometrics, and we're looking at that whole element of distraction. We reported a little bit out in September. We actually just accepted, thank you, Horst, and thank you, ARF. We'll be presenting the fuller study at the March conference. So come to the March. You like to come to the March conference, and you'll see some new work from Nielsen Consumer Neuro. And tablet and digital and work-related multitasking reduces attention. Again, it's cognitive. People's minds are probably not on the screen when they're doing that. Telephone and phone users watching with light moderate ad loads are much less likely to multitask, providing a sweet spot for attention and recall. So again, a lot of this isn't surprising, but you don't do research to be surprised. You do research to confirm some thinking and to stumble upon findings like the countdown clock. Okay, this is a first look at a specific additional piece of research that we did. That for all of our major studies virtually, we make sure to have a good Spanish-speaking sample. Part of that, you all know Cyril, and Cyril's commitment to that question and her commitment to CRE. So we had for here, we worked with 150 Spanish speakers who speak Spanish in the home. And the overall findings are pretty close in terms of the overall experience of watching TV. Basically, here it was actually closer. In this group of 150, the larger TV screen was not that much more impactful in terms of the viewing experience than the others. It might speak to a lot of the new digital technology is more familiar within that community. Now, this was an interesting finding, and I'm going to leave it a little while to explore it. What we saw and what we would expect, a light ad load would have no recall. But with our Spanish speaking, we speak Spanish. Well, maybe you can answer the question. Why do we think the moderate ad load was better than the light ad load? Now, I'll tell you, and you were at that meeting, Peter, with the members of the committee, lots of hypotheses. Researchers are very good at coming up with narratives to explain whatever data they see, right? If you notice, there's no asterisk of significance, something I didn't notice until I was reviewing for today. So it is not a statistically significant finding. May be true, may not be true. We can't say with much certainty. So that's research as a process. Maybe we should go back and do it again, do a larger sample, take a look. But while it does appear that the moderate ad load, I wouldn't try to create a reason for it until we know we can say it with some confidence, which at this point, Peter, you'd agree we can't say with confidence. Thank you. What about the countdown clock? Well, amongst the Spanish speakers, and this is significant, no countdown clock was an advantage. I don't know why that is. Maybe Spanish speakers have a different concept of the meaning of time than English speakers. I don't know. But the countdown clock, maybe there was a sense of urgency that people didn't like about a countdown clock. I don't know. But what I can tell you is in the Spanish speakers, no countdown clock was preferred. I'm sorry, it was a brand recall. Recall was better without a countdown clock. Now, this was another odd finding, and it bugged me. As I was looking at it, it just bugged me. And there was another reason. It wasn't lack of statistical significance. It was simply error. Lesson learned. Research is messy. Sometimes there are errors. So we corrected it. These charts are not to scale, but those are the correct numbers there. So what we found is there is a difference in the Spanish versus the English speakers in terms of what type of multitasking takes place. And what we saw, and I'll show in a second, that speaking and eating are much more common among Spanish speakers. Now, growing up in a Jewish household, I thought speaking and eating were a Jewish behavior, but evidently the Spanish community is similar to the Jews in that regard. And again, this is really a first look. It's not clean. I wanted to show something new here. We'll get these out. We'll have a webinar sharing the results if anyone's interested. But here's the takeaways from the Spanish survey. Overall, similar experience on all devices. Recalled brands best when the ad load is moderate, although had I known about that asterisk, that would not have been considered a takeaway. I would call it a head scratcher. They're less able to recall brands with the presence of a countdown clock. That held up. It's pretty interesting. You probably won't see countdown clocks on Univision or Telemundo. And they engage in more non-digital multitasking. That held up. And that's what we got. And I did it with 4 minutes left, and we got time for questions, and I'd love to take some. Or? The second for Spanish or for? Oh, yeah, sure. Laura is throwing darts my way and says that, well, these data are wrong. The corrected slide. I don't have the statistical significance to show on this one. What we'll have to do is either wait for the webinar or we'll get this corrected. It'll be on our website correct. Research is a messy process. Who knows Janet Gallen? I love Janet Gallen. I was going to say that I do. I was talking to Janet this morning, and I was talking about the messiness and this and that, and she added, we're also basically a moving target right now in all these questions. This industry is changing so quickly. The findings she did last year with Laura's company are now open to question because it's a year old. So it's messy, it's changing, it's challenging. It's a heck of a lot of fun, and it's messy and challenging and changing. Other questions? I give you 3 minutes back, Jasper. You didn't think I could do it, did you?
Cheers. Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much. Thank you, Richard. That was great. So we're going to move on now. We're going to have a discussion around, if I'm going to go the right way with the slides, anyway, we're going to talk about media strategies across screens. So why don't we, hi Andrea, why don't we welcome the esteemed panelists. We've got Adam Gerber from ABC. Join us, please, Adam. Nick Johnson from Turner. Brandon Levine from our host, Digitest. Thanks again, Brandon, and John Sollecito from SymphonyAM. So we're going to have to share the mic, guys, today. Take a seat wherever you want. Perfect. Thanks for being here today, guys. So, do you guys, the Blind Date exists in America, right? The show, TV show? Yeah. Right. So I'm not sure if they use exactly the same words that they do in the UK, but the way they would all start that off would be tell us a little bit about yourself and where you come from. So let's do the kind of the media version of that. Tell us a bit, go for it.
And I get to go first. Adam Gerber with ABC. I've been with ABC for about 6 years, and I lead their client development and communications group across the sales organization, both linear TV, all of our on-demand properties, and digital. Spent a number of years on the agency side, also at a couple startups in between agencies and Disney. And I've worked with Nick for 20 years, and this is the first time we're on a panel together, so I'm very excited about this.
I've avoided those because you're a lot smarter than I am. I'm Nick Johnson. I've been at Turner for about 9 months. I run ad sales strategy for the entertainment and news portfolio, emerging consumer as well, everything outside of sports. Prior to that, I was at NBC Universal for 9 years. And before that, a bunch of other digital companies, startups. And actually, my fun fact, your fun fact was us knowing each other for 20 years. My first job was in this building on these floors at an advertising agency called Levine, Huntley, Schmidt and Beaver. So it's kind of weird coming back here.
The same floor?
A collection of floors, yeah.
Yeah, hi, I am John Sollecito. I've been at Symphony Advanced Media now for about 6 months. But before that, I spent around 20 years on the client side. Spent a number of my years with Betsy Frank at MTV Networks. And I head up the client solutions team over at Symphony Advanced Media. So what we do is we work very closely with our clients to make sure that they're getting the value from the data that we're providing, and I'm sort of the client internal spy because I've spent so much time on the client side. Now being on the vendor side, I probably ask a lot of the real difficult questions internally. So I don't know how long I'm going to last there. So 6 months and counting.
Hi everybody, Brandon Levine at Digitas. So welcome everybody. I have a very unique role in that I lead TV investment at a data-centric digital agency. So you can imagine the hardship over the last couple of years. I have a very traditional background, but that traditional background very quickly evolved since I've been here, and I've done a complete 180 as we try to redefine our approach to a very traditional medium.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody. So in terms of evolution, then, my first question is around about, we talked about the reinvention of TV. We know that TV is being reinvented, not least on the screens that Richard talked us through the impact of so eloquently just now. How do you characterize that reinvention, guys? And you can perhaps frame it in the context of when you started in the industry and that which it is now.
Well, I think there are a couple different layers to how it's being reinvented. I don't think there's any reinvention going on with regards to what TV is best at, which is great storytelling. TV has always been about telling fantastic stories and entertaining the audience. And I think that if anything, we're in the term's been used many times before, a golden age of that, right? Whether it's from the competition that now exists with cable networks and non-ad supported platforms, we've got a wealth of great content out there. So I think, I wouldn't call that a reinvention. I would just call that a continued evolution. But I think in terms of our business from an advertising perspective, there are a couple things that are going on that are rather dramatic relative to kind of when I started in this business in 1992 on P&G, an average primetime rating was probably a 12. And no one watched on demand. David, correct me. You remember those days. What was an average primetime rating in 1992? Yeah, you were always a Unilever guy. Now an average primetime rating is a 1.8 or a 2. If we look at the numbers that Nielsen's putting out, which I will say are not complete, and I think that's the first part of the reinvention of TV that has to happen, which is we need new measurement solutions, whether that's provided by Nielsen, Symphony, ComScore, Rentrak. We are missing a growing and increasing percentage of the amount of viewing that's going on across screens. And this fallacy that people aren't watching TV is just completely erroneous. I'll give a great example. Designated Survivor, our hit show this year, did about a 2.2 live same-day rating, 18 to 49. On a 21-day CIMM basis across all platforms, it approaches a 6. So there is a big problem in the industry with regards to measurement. The second thing I'd say that we need to reinvent is the way that marketers and agencies think about buying. Stop thinking about buying platforms and start thinking about buying experiences. When someone tunes into a long-form show, whether it's on Turner or any of your networks or ABC or NBC Universal's networks, etc., we all deliver an experience that tends to be consumed on the large screen. And you saw some statistics in the CRE presentation about how the large screen delivers the best ad recall and experience for the consumer. Short form content, it's not being consumed on the large screen. It's being consumed on the small screen. And so if you start thinking about experiences as opposed to platforms, I think that the way that we think about television and the way that we aggregate audiences across screens will change. So I'll shut up and let Nick expound.
Yeah, I don't like to follow you. It's difficult. I think that, you could just look at the level of sophistication. When I started in this building, the network buyer probably was the last person to speak in any pitch, right? And now media is at the center of everything, at the front of, at the jumping off point of every meeting. I really agree with what Adam says about experiences, and he and I were basically on opposite ends of the same table when Hulu launched back in the day, which was really about extending our experience into digital with massive scale. For the last 4 years, I worked at NBC Sports running the digital sales business there, and that's an entirely different experience, a live experience. And you see that within these experiences, even the currency begins to change based on supply and demand constraints of that inventory, as well as the experience. If you're a Rangers fan and you're watching the game on your mobile device, you're leaning in and you're leaning forward very, very closely. The other thing that's interesting for us, and it creates greater complexity, I think, around this notion of a single currency is, if you look at my linear network for CNN, I'm being gentle here, it's 50 plus. If you look at our digital portfolio, people watching our content, live streaming our content, it's in 40s, mobile's 30s, and then you look at our off-channel distribution, Snapchat, Facebook Live, everything. Now you're yet again younger in your mid-20s, kind of in there. And those are all sort of just directional, but that creates a real challenge when you try to unify the experience from a pricing and packaging perspective, because the audiences are wildly different. So, we're really focused on where is a brand like CNN entitled to be? And right now, CNN is distributed onto 53 distribution points. That's a lot of places. That's a lot of content. There's a lot that has to be contemplated in stitching that all together. So for a brand like CNN, the stitching together of that experience comes with a lot of technology and just sort of philosophical challenges in terms of how do you deliver an experience to that end consumer between pushing out the content and them receiving the content on the other end of their pipe, whatever it is.
Thanks, Nick. And then John, from the shout into the microphone here, from the measurement side, how do you perceive characterizing it, reinvention? How do you perceive that from a consumer perspective?
Yeah, sure. A lot of the data that we look at, what we're seeing more and more is that time shifting is really becoming, the norm. When we looked at broadcast primetime programming, if we looked at 2016 to date, 60% of the total minutes, so the total viewing minutes, are spent time shifting. And that number just continues to climb, and it's becoming more and more of the norm, and it's happening across all demos. In particular, when we look at 25 to 34s, just over 70% of their total viewing time is spent time shifting. And Adam, mentioned Designated Survivor, but when we looked at the current broadcast season now, and if we looked at the top 10 broadcast programs in Prime, just over 70% of the viewing time across those programs are happening in time shift. The top programs within that group that are being time shifted, and Designated Survivor happens to be one of those, along with The Flash and Lucifer. Nearly 80% of their viewing time is being time shifted.
I'm going to pull a Trump. It's actually the top show, time shifted. Wrong.
So
You got to stand up and stand behind it.
I said within that group, it's one of. But he's right. When he talked about the rating, and when you look at it out to 21 days, and it jumps dramatically. I mean, we're seeing that across, all, not just broadcast, but cable as well. And we're seeing a big impact too, even for Hulu. I think that the biggest thing that has changed recently is the notion out there that, nobody's watching linear TV or nobody's watching broadcast. That's so far from the truth. What's happening is that those programs and that content is being consumed now more than ever. It's just that, where that's happening and at what time period has changed dramatically. And when you look at that, out across a larger spectrum, you're seeing that those types of programs are still getting a tremendous amount of audience.
Right. So huge shift, right? Massive shifts all around. So Brandon, from close on up to the advertiser side and the agency side, what is the impact of all these changes, the shift towards time shifting and thinking about things in a different way?
I mean, we've taken steps, I would say baby steps, to evolve our strategy. A few years ago, the big breakthrough was fluidity, right?
Fluidity?
So for those that don't know, fluidity was a tactic that buyers use to shift around 5, 10, 15% of their linear TV impressions across screens, primarily full episode players. That tactic is still in market, it's popular, but seems somewhat outdated and needs to evolve. And I think the way we're going to do that is to ask questions, right? Does 10 to 15% need to be the set percentage. Why 10 to 15% across every network? Is content viewed differently by genre across screens, by category, by network? Are we reaching new viewers across screens? Is it a reach play or is it a frequency play? And what's the dynamic between those two? Another thing that's really interesting is not just how we're buying it, but where we're buying it from, who we're buying it from, because traditional TV content is available in so many different places. Is network direct really the right way to go? You guys might have something to say about that, but there are a lot of aggregators out there that can help us streamline those efforts. Right. The Yumi's out there, TubeMogul, and Sama TV. And then the other way to go could be going through devices, right? Roku is out there selling this type of inventory. PlayStation had just View that came out. So as a buyer, it's really, really overwhelming. I mean, how many different ways can we access premium TV content is the question.
So it's a really interesting question. And I hope Nick backs me up on this. You know where I'm going?
Mic like a phone, yeah.
Do you want to say it?
No, you go for it.
You sure?
Yes.
You cannot buy premium TV content through TubeMogul and other aggregator sources. You can buy short form, low quality remnant inventory through platforms
the R word.
like TubeMogul and other aggregators. There is very little scale, if any, of premium TV content on those platforms, nor do I expect that there will be anytime soon.
Yes. No, I was going to just add too, and I think that it's one of the things that we're sort of sitting up here wrestling with and trying to hold on to. Now, the Yumis and TubeMoguls and all these middleware guys, like that battle's over. And I think maybe if you're I don't know, you just shouldn't be letting other guys sell your stuff. The new platforms that are emerging, the OTTs, VOD, the new distribution that's coming, like we're really wrapping our heads around how do we extend that same value proposition there. Nobody knows how to sell our stuff better than we do. And while we may cut deals with people like Hulu, be parts of the skinny bundle, again, we're going to continue to own our inventory within those distribution channels. You may get a bite at the apple downstream because Hulu sells sort of ROS if we don't sell our stuff out, but we do a great job of selling our stuff.
Thanks, guys. Switching gears a little bit now away from consumer behavior and the way the media is sold to reflect that. Thinking about the impact of different platforms, right? I know, Adam, one thing you and I chatted about a few weeks ago now was some of the work that you've done with Accenture. And I thought that was interesting in terms of, you all heard me talking earlier on about the impact of combining platforms, right? 5 platform campaign is 35% more effective than a single platform campaign. And it felt when we spoke as if your study was in the same kind of ballpark. I don't know if you can just kind of share that with the audience.
Our study was less about trying to measure, specific impacts by platform. It was more about trying to disentangle some confusion about attribution research and the value of television and brand building versus lower funnel tactics that exist in the digital space. And so again, getting back to this idea of we should focus on experiences, not platforms. Our approach to our work with Accenture was kind of centered on the fact, and I want to give Turner credit because the thing that led us to want to do this work was a paper that Turner issued 2 years ago with Market Share Partners, which was a really great first stab, in our view, at looking at the value of television from an ROI perspective for brands. But we wanted to kind of change the conversation and not talk about TV versus digital, because a growing percentage of our business is digital. People watch our shows on their tablets and on desktop and on phones. That's digital. So we wanted to talk about long-form premium content experiences versus digital broken into what we think digital is, which is search, which is a information-seeking experience, display advertising, which is akin to print. It's a text and graphics-based delivery on a page with other things going on, and short-form video, which we perceive as a snacking experience that people do when they're in line or in transit or with a few minutes to spare. But those are very different experiences from someone choosing to watch a 30 or a 60-minute show. So the work that we did with Accenture was to try to look at actual spending by brands, not syndicated reported spending, which is usually off by huge amounts, especially in the digital space, actual spending by channel tied to actual transaction data. And Accenture had both of those sets of data for 20 brands. We looked at 3 years worth of spending, $12 billion across 20 brands, and we found 4 major themes. The first of which is when you actually properly attribute ROI and you take away the credit that downstream digital companies like Google and Facebook are claiming because they have the last touch, and you re-attribute it to the thing that actually drove the brand recognition and the consideration, TV. Television's ROI impact goes up 10%, digital goes down 18%. So there's a reallocation of value proposition there. The second thing we found was that most marketers look at attribution on a 12-month cycle, which is not appropriate for television, which has long-term residual impact on brands. When you actually extend out to 3 years, what you find is that if in year 1, a brand achieved an incremental dollar of sales from their TV investment, and notice I said the word incremental, so we factored out base sales. In years 2 and 3, they get another $1.13. So the value of TV investment in year 1 delivers more value in year 2 and 3 than it did in the first year. The third thing that we found was that although digital has great impact in the first part of the spend, just like a reach curve, it diminishes quickly, and it diminishes much more quickly than the ROI curve for television, print, or other traditional vehicles. And the last thing we found was that if you did look at long-form digital versus short-form digital, you find that long-form digital, even with the premium CPMs, has substantially higher ROI impact for brands. And our assumption there is because that most short-form inventory is running in environments that are incredibly cluttered. There's significant bot traffic and fraud, and the viewability is an issue. But when you're watching long-form content, you're watching on a full screen with no interruption, no viewability issues, and very little bot and fraud.
Brandon, what's your perspective on that? Impact of different screens, basically.
Well, I don't know if I have a case study. That was impressive. I will talk just a bit about changing your perspective. I think is probably step one, and the recognition and understanding that we can use this sort of fragmentation and what's basically the challenging marketplace dynamics that exist is really an opportunity as opposed to a challenge, right? I mean, you're a TV buyer, it's tough out there. I mean, every single quarter or every year we're challenged with selling in strategies and providing marketplace updates that have arrows that go the wrong way, right? I mean, it's fragmentation up, ratings erosion up, demand up, and premiums up. And that's a very tough thing to sell into a client. Like, what's that next slide? Like, what is your strategy? What's your answer to that? And then at some point, our advertiser's going to push back and say, just saving me 2%, still playing a +5 versus a +7. I'm not sure that that's really success. And so, I look at the fragmentation and as more of an opportunity, as an answer, as a strategic answer to really navigate that and come up with a different position. It's just understanding the value that can bring. So if you have an advertiser and you're spending the same year over year and you're only achieving 80% of the reach, this is a very strategic way to make up that reach at a much more cost-efficient way.
Yeah, I mean, the other point I wanted to add is that at Turner anyway, one of the things that we did early on this past year was we took some of the key learnings from digital and started applying them back to TV. So for our TBS originals, we have a limited commercial interruption because we know, right, the consumer likes that. We've seen it in other distribution channels, other mediums, and so we've swum that upstream, same with True TV. And again, that creates a real challenge for a television buyer because we're saying we know that GRPs are already constrained. We're going to compress them further in our best content because we think that the return on that investment is better. And that strategy has been pretty successful in the marketplace, so we're looking to do it in more and more places. I do think the other challenge, though, is that there's not a one-for-one conversion because, again, as some of these audiences begin to migrate, and CNN's the best example I can think of just because of how old the network is. Before I joined the company, I'm not sure I believed that a really young audience would find CNN and consume it the way that it does. And the fact of the matter is that CNN has a really, really strong young millennial audience, and that is actually great for us because it sort of future-proofs and insulates the brand. But then again, when you're trying to deal with this fragmentation model, you can't just re-express these CNN on-air GRPs into these new distribution channels because the audience is younger, and arguably doing things differently and maybe better and more valuable. So that conversion is not a simple share shift or re-expression of dollars amongst the same channels. It really inverts sort of that whole media mix.
Thanks, Nick. Looking out to the future, about the future of measurement, the future of TV, the future of a whole bunch of other different ways of delivering content to consumers. John, super background, right? You've been around for a while, seen a lot of change here. Where do you think we're going in terms of let's focus just right now on TV and long form content, video effectively. Where do you think it's going? What are we going to look like in 5 years' time?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is what we've been saying on the across the panel today is that the long form video is happening in so many different places, and everything is really being driven today more by consumers than it ever has been before. For a while, the industry was really trying to dictate where their content was being viewed, and those days are over. I think everybody up here would agree with that. But as we move forward, I think the biggest challenge is going to be getting the pure measurement around this new behavior and showing the value. And I think that one of the biggest challenges we have is that the content is just going to continue to go on platforms. And I think one of the things, and this by no means is a sales pitch, but one of the things that we're doing at Symphony is relying on ACR technology because we're following the content rather than the platform. And I think as we move forward in long form video, that's going to be more and more prevalent because one of the things that we see happening today is that a lot of long form video is happening on Facebook and other social platforms, and it's really hard to measure that because for whatever reasons they have. I mean, Facebook's not allowing people inside their walled garden, so to speak. Or same thing with like a Netflix or a Hulu, and we've gotten into some trouble publicly for talking about how content is performing on those platforms. But as we move forward, it's like the industry needs to understand that. We need to understand how is a streaming original going to be more valuable or less valuable than something on broadcast. And I mean, what we see is that content is content. It doesn't matter if it's coming from Netflix or if it's something on ABC or Turner or CNN or what have you. Content is still going to be king, and it's still we need to figure out ways to measure that. And until we could really wrap our arms around the ROI for that, I think there's going to be a lot of confusion. There's going to be a lot of how do we fit it's the whole round peg into the square box, which is happening. But I would say that tremendous strides are happening. I'd say within the next 5 years, I think we're going to be a lot further along in terms of understanding how this audience and how this content is traveling across platform. But the biggest takeaway I have is focusing on content, not focusing on platforms, because tomorrow, next year, there'll probably be 10 more platforms where this content could exist.
Interesting perspective. Pivoting now from the future of measurement into the future of, we're talking about this, the whole event is about measurement and targeting. I want to hear from the TV guys first about targeting. What do you see that in like a couple of years' time? And obviously, we've only seen over the last couple of years a fair amount of change and potentially consolidation in the industry. I want to talk about targeting. How do you see that in, say, 3 years' time?
This is where Nick and I are going to have very different opinions. Maybe. So, look, first, I want to start with the premise, and you didn't bring it up, so I'm not suggesting you did, but I hear it often. Oh, TV's never been a data-driven business. TV's been one of the most data-driven businesses since its inception. We've just used whatever data we've had available to optimize the buy, right? We went from households to demos. People have been buying demos for decades. They pay for the demographic group they're trying to reach. Now we happen to have new data sets that are available to us that allow us to go further beyond demos to purchase behavior or other segments, client custom segments. And now there are folks talking about using those segments to literally address advertising to the home. So there's a difference between, in my mind, using data to optimize a schedule of units that live in shows, okay, which is how the TV business has operated since its inception, to addressing ads to devices or people based on what you know about them. Right. That latter business is going to take a very, very long time to evolve. It evolves in pockets of the industry today through some of the MVPDs and satellite companies within the local inventory on cable networks. It does not exist anywhere in the national footprint of any cable network or broadcast network. And that's about probably 90% of all the viewing that occurs in the US. So it's a tiny, tiny percentage of the inventory avails that exist in the marketplace. Now, to the broader business question of, does it make sense for us to go there? We're sold out. And I can answer this politically or I can answer it honestly. I'm going to do a little of both. As a network, we're sold out, and people pay us premiums to run in primetime ABC programming because it works. There are lots of places that sell video inventory at 50-cent, $1, $2, $3 CPMs. I think that's where you're going to see data enablement have the most impact, because those environments have infinite amounts of inventory. They can manufacture it at will, and they really don't have any cost of content. They're leveraging other people's content on their platforms. So I think that you'll see a lot more addressability evolve in those environments than you will seeing it evolve in the broadcast networks. Certainly, I'm not sure about the cable networks. I think you'll see it happen in different places within the cable universe. But I do think all of us are going to focus on that first bucket around taking data, taking better customized segmentation, purchase behavior data, and using it to help our clients drive their business by optimizing schedules.
Yeah, I mean, I think we agree on some and maybe disagree a little bit on some of the other. But I mean, I think the first part is that if you have all this fragmentation of audience happening cross-device, cross-distribution channel, and there's not a measurement of attribution, so you can stitch it all together and know how many people you have, that's a problem. That's going to have to get fixed soon. And I also think, like, for our company, John Martin, our CEO, said by 2020, wants 50% of our business to be sort of audience-based. We have big digital properties between CNN and Bleacher. Those certainly are audiences that can be leverage better at advanced targeting across all those distribution channels. But I think, we have a pretty interesting group in Turner Ignite that's thinking about, how do you take sort of this data level platform that already exists and right now is really focused on sort of the closed loop programmatic business in the digital space. And that at some point, whether it's a year, 5 years, 10 years in the future, there will be platforms that allow you to leverage that addressability. And, we have a group at our company that we call Yield. It's strat planning and a bunch of other things. But the objective is, even in environments where we're sold out, the question is, if we have visibility into a super CPM that's based on some level of targeting, is that a pursuit worth going after? And I think sort of philosophically, the answer is yes. So we're trying to get ourselves organized to be able to build towards that, although it's still a long ways away.
But what I think we both skirted around, and let me ask you, because you said super CPM.
Right.
What this comes down to is, are advertisers willing to pay the premiums to slice the audience up? So if you think about a TV unit today, if you think that you're paying a $40 CPM for everyone watching that show, you're not. You're paying a $300 or a $400 CPM for some of the people who are the most valuable, and you're paying a 30-cent CPM for the really old people who you don't want to reach. Okay, and it blends out to a $40 CPM until the agency and buying community is ready to step up and say, okay, for that 15 or 20% of the audience that I really, really want, I've already been paying $300 for them for the last decade. Now I'll really actually put that on paper on the buy. Right. We're not going to get there.
No, you don't have to hold it. No, you don't have to hold it for me. And that's against conventional demos and everything else. And that's right. I mean, that's not to say there's not a ton of heavy lifting that needs to happen, but if we're able to get at really rich anonymized first-party data that gets to sort of attribution or purchase behavior, purchase intent around a something, that then may say, if you have enough content across enough channels, across enough time, can you spin an audience big enough that makes enough sense to displace a demographically based CPM?
All right. Thanks, guys. We're going to take a couple of minutes for questions if we have any from the audience. Mr. Marins.
Oh, so you're asking, we didn't really talk about the problems with digital measurement yet relative to TV. Is that what you're asking about? Yeah, I mean, the problem is that, a video start or a digital impression is counted, based on today's, whatever standards you want to call them, at 2 seconds. So if the impression plays for 2 seconds and it's viewable, it counts. That's not how the TV measurement works. And we've got people from Nielsen who can probably expound on it. But we need to bring duration-weighted metrics to the environment of digital so that we have comparable metrics. There was, everyone saw the story, I hope, about Facebook's overestimation of their video delivery. It was grossly overestimated based on the fact that they were not factoring in duration into their calculations properly. So if you actually look at things properly, and the VABs put out tremendous white papers on this, television and existing long-form video programmers still make up the vast majority of the available ad capacity in the marketplace that's actually watched. Correct.
Both live viewing going on with heavy viewers, right? The heavy viewers from in medium and a great majority of the overall viewership. So are they both watching live TV and doing time shifting and doing digital? Are people watching 40 hours? I'm joking, but I don't understand the consumer behavior in the overall. Is it a lot of live viewing? Is there a lot of what's really going on?
I think, What's that? All right. I think, what the question that was being asked was if you have live viewership versus somebody's time shifting, what's the value between those audiences, or are they the same? I think, what we're saying is that, and as an industry, I think we'd all agree that we have to do a lot better than we're doing today. But to answer your question is that somebody could be watching a show 14 days from now on their tablet and be just as much as a rabid fan who's somebody who's tuning in live. And the point is that there's value beyond, what we've been used to for the last 30 years. And we're going to continue to move towards people watching content on demand or time shifting or like watching on whatever platform it is based on when they feel like they have time to do that. So I wouldn't necessarily say, and this is kind of what I thought you were saying, and maybe you weren't, but if somebody's watching live, are they more valuable than somebody who's watching 21?
How much of this is live? How much is being missed?
Yeah.
Depends on the genre. So to your point, David, it depends on the genre, right? And I think John can attest to this. What we see with ABC, alternatives are watched live. Reality's watched live. 10 to 15% of that viewing happens time shifted, okay? Dramas are the most time shifted, especially the 10 o'clock hour, Okay. And so, yes, you're right. Designated Survivor is the top. It's got the most time-shifted viewing behavior, but there are plenty of shows on other networks and on ours that almost double their audience when you look at time shifting, whether it's Blacklist or a whole host of others. But it's also not binary. I think part of your question was, I don't understand who's doing all this. Like, don't people just watch live? People do everything. And what we found in some of our research this year for the first time was that more than half of all TV viewers now watch on multiple screens at different points of the week. Sometimes they watch live, sometimes they watch on their tablet, sometimes, what? Ultimately, it accrues to, and I think if you look at the Nielsen work that they put out annually on the average time spent watching television, the average time spent watching TV programming was flat this year versus last. But when you so why does it matter whether it's live?
Well, so when we look 2016 to date, we're seeing that 40% of broadcast prime total minutes are live and 60% are time shifted. Now that time shift could be DVR3, it could be,
and it depends 40% on the demo.
Is live. But and it has a lot to do with the genre.
And the demo. 2554, yeah.
Right? I mean, by category. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It also depends on the genre of the individual network.
Right.
Live is 99% plus.
Right.
News.
He's
anxious too.
That's something that I would watch on a Friday after I've gone out to dinner and I'm having drinks. You and I are high income educated people. I want to know about the people who are in Kentucky. I want to know about everything. We just want to get an answer on this, which is not the value, not the value, not what Chris is doing, anyone else is doing. What's really going on in viewership on video? 40% live versus 80% live overall.
I don't think there's one answer, and I think this gentleman just answered it perfectly, which is.
And what happens, you find that be it a demo, whatever, people base their viewing around their lifestyle. So what happens is, depending on what your lifestyle is, that's how you map out your daily lives. I know I have young millennials too. How they view it and the advice they view and what they do are similar. It's just that schedule the shows they're watching and every week they lifestyle. So they still.
Thank you. Now, if anyone has the answers to David's exacting questions, you can find them in the break now. So let's take a break now. But first of all, a round of applause for the panelists here. Thank you so much, guys. And they're super interesting. So we'll meet back over this side of the room at 3:50. 15 minutes. Thanks, guys.